Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations. I'm just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, coming at you from a very secret and sensitive location that could not be revealed to you unless you were part of the two. And I am just one of the two, and with me is the other one of the two, Jedi Master John Mills. How are you doing, John?
I'm confused as to where I am precisely. I'm in a mountain, maybe somewhere in a hunting preserve with top secret banking people. And I think this is sort of like a remake of The Deadliest Game, but possibly not, because I got a whole lot of lightsabers and a whole lot of people with problems with me, and I don't know what I did. But they're all mad at me, and I don't know why.
No, this is more like one of those secret society meetings of Skull and Bones, or with all of our secret rituals and, things that we can't talk about. But before we dive into our episode this week, as we celebrate the spooky Halloween episode, we want to remind you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and we would really appreciate some support, either by sharing the show with your friends on social media or word of mouth. We're at the Jedi Masters over on X Twitter or on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party with the entire network. You can also find us online at thenerdparty.com, and of course, you can see what else is going on over on Instagram, following at the Nerd Party as well, and see all the different shows that are coming out there. But John, we had promised everybody that we were going to talk about Darth Plagueis, the Legends book by James Luceno, and we're doing that here to celebrate Halloween. And first, I just want to ask you, did you read this book when it originally dropped? I believe the date it dropped was in 2012 or 2011. I can't remember exactly which one, but
I'm pretty sure you're right. It was 2012. I believe it was near the change of ownership. I was excited to read it because, of course, anything dealing with the Sith is always going to be somewhat fascinating at the very least. But did you read it at the time? Was this a hardcover you got the day it came out? Did you pre-order this thing? Was this something you were really chomping at the bit for? Or did you have, and I'll tip my hand here, like myself, a small amount of trepidation about this book?
Mm-hmm. This was definitely a book that I read when it came out. I did own a copy of it, and in a move that I made a long time ago, which was apparently a terrible move, I sold a bunch of my Star Wars books because I had, through, I think, Fate of the Jedi series. So, I had all of these books, and all of my various moves about 15 years ago, I was downsizing books, and I got rid of this one, unfortunately, which the reason that's unfortunate right now is because the original hardcovers for this book are going anywhere from $70 to $150 on eBay. And so, yes, I did read this when it originally came out. I was very excited for this book. The idea that we were going to learn about Darth Plagueis the Wise and the story behind him, and then the rise of Sidious as well, was just, I couldn't think, honestly, of a better idea personally. And so you said you were trepidatious. What made you kind of trepidatious coming into this?
Well, this is where I get hate mail at this point. I don't think I've ever really made it a secret, though, is that I always enjoyed the fact that in 2005, there was a question as to whether Palpatine was just making up a story to string Anakin along because he knew it's the one thing Anakin wanted to hear, or whether he was telling the truth. And I thought that it was really interesting in the movie to sit there, and it was like a Rorschach test. Because there's, of course, the Kaiser Soze approach to everything from The Usual Suspects, that the best lie is wrapped in the truth. But then there's also the idea that Palpatine is essentially the corporeal equivalent of the Star Wars Satan at that point. And so, of course, he's going to have a story right up his sleeve that is exactly what our hero needs to hear to bring him along. So for me, it was always a fun sort of debate as to whether Darth Plagueis was actually his master, whether Darth Plagueis actually ever truly existed, or if it was a story from years and years past sort of thing. None of that really comes into play in terms of whether I'm going to read the book back in 2012, because that's my trepidation about it. But basically, it meant that I was going into the book with a very exacting attitude, where if it didn't knock my socks off, it was going to be a book I would ignore. And if I didn't really enjoy what it laid out, it was going to be a book where I have always had this approach to the expanded universe stuff to say, if I don't like it, I'm ignoring it. I think Filoni said something about that recently, about how fans can approach quote unquote canon, where he's like, well, if they don't like it, they just pretend it doesn't exist. And I'm like, yeah, that's sort of been my superpower sort of thing. But you were excited to go into it. So I'm guessing that's just, I mean, is that simply because you were always itching, just you had to know the details about Darth Plagueis? You just always took Palpatine at his word, and you were like, I'm just, I really want to know how these two came together and how it moved forward. Like, what was it? Just a spark from the minute you heard about the project? You were like, yes, this is the book I've been looking for.
I think that for me, this was more of one of those things where I was just excited to learn more behind the scenes. And I think, the opportunity to understand, how Sidious became Sidious, how Palpatine got, roped into the Sith, and then the backstory too of Plagueis. And I think the most interesting part about this was the way in which it would tell the story then about that whole question, of, bringing people back to life, saving people from dying. And, I think if that was really a true thing. And so, I hate to spoil it for everybody, but I think one of the geniuses here of Luceno's book is the way in which he is able to craft this story and actually show, I think, we keep talking about in the book this idea, the grand plan, which Plagueis very much realizes that the grand plan of the Sith for the, millennia that they have been, quote unquote, extinct, at least that's what the rest of the galaxy really thinks, that they have been working on this grand plan to destroy the Jedi, to bring down the Republic. And the idea that Plagueis believes he is close to this, and in finding Sidious, he believes he finds the perfect person to bring to fruition this millennia-long plan is just, I think, phenomenal. And so to me, I think that's the thing that really is just so fascinating in reading this book. And I think, I rereading this book, I was just completely astounded as to how good it is. And even just that one focus of bringing the grand plan to fruition, but that's not the only place I think that this book is astounding.
Well, tying into what you're talking about, what I was reminded of rereading it, I should say, is that when it came out, I loved the fact that it explains why the rule of two was basically the hypocrisy of the Sith, that the rule of two was never really adhered to with true devotion. Because that's always been the question of, oh, well, how could Palpatine be going after Luke and Vader's going after Luke? And then we find out there are secret apprentices and then the Inquisitors are set up. And how does that violate the rule of two? And we've gone back and forth with the on-screen stuff, and that's still the on-screen stuff. But Luceno in this book, I enjoy the fact that he sets up, it feels very authentic that the rule of two was followed as a matter of convenience by some and true devotion by others. And so it was a rule, but not a dogmatic rule, as Palpatine might say.
I mean, they were like guidelines.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you know, but I enjoy the fact that Luceno very carefully frames it as Plagueis's pride makes him see that he is destined to be the one to bring it forward, because what Luceno is doing here is he's planting the idea that, of course, Palpatine becomes the one to think that he's going to be the one to live forever, that he's going to be the one to figure out and crack the code, because his teacher instilled that very thought in him, that we're the ones. Plagueis says to Sidious at one point, we're the ones that, paraphrasing here, this is not exact dialogue, obviously, but he basically says to Sidious, we're the ones that are going to live forever. There are no two after us. We're it. Because Sidious says, the Sith that come after us will talk about you. And Plagueis basically says, what are you talking about after us? Oh no, we're it. We win. We're going to go on forever. And what's amazing, and this is the most boneheaded, this exhibits what the most boneheaded thing about just throwing out the expanded universe on the whole was for Disney, is that in this book is the very explanation that makes Palpatine's quest for immortality in the sequel trilogy actually make more story sense in the context of the films, because you see throughout this book that he's been trained to specifically seek this stuff and figure it the F out. So throwing this book out and not taking this book and making it the Acolyte is a tremendous misstep on Disney's part.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because the one thought that kept running through my mind as we, read through it is this idea. Why is this not just the story of the Acolyte? Like, why aren't we calling Palpatine the Acolyte? Because, like you said, this legitimizes, a lot of what they end up doing in the sequel trilogy, especially in the final film, because this is exactly the thread that then when you look at what they did in The Bad Batch, what they've done in The Mandalorian, like all of the things then play together. And so to then utilize, I think, Plagueis in such a terrible way in that show makes no sense. Now, the idea that, he had maybe a previous apprentice or somebody he's interested in, that's fine or whatever. But it's like, even with the Acolyte, you could still do this, right? You can still do this story, and you should, because, like you said, this story makes that all make sense. And on top of that, there's actually a whole section there in the book where Plagueis is talking to Sidious, and he's talking about the ways of the Sith, and these are some quotes that just really stood out to me. He said, "You were brought into being to lead, therefore you must see every living thing as nothing more than a tool to elevate you, to move you to your destined place. This is our galaxy, Sidious, our reality." And then he says, "The actions of the Sith begin from the self and flow outward. We stalk the Force like hunters rather than surrender like prey to its enigmatic wills." And it's like those two quotes right there show everything that was wrong with the Acolyte and its idea of pursuing the dark side and what it really meant to be a Sith. You're not some sort of victim where, oh, boo-hoo, you. No, the dark side is all about taking power for yourself. It's all about never feeling sorry for yourself and taking what you deserve, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the very thing that show never got. And this is the very thing that this book does such a great job on. And as I'm reading through it, and just everything that Luceno lays out here and what it means to be the Sith. I mean, it's astounding the understanding that he has of what makes the Sith tick. It's phenomenal.
Well, additionally, and this could still work within the context of the Acolyte, where you wind up that shot of Plagueis peeking out from the rocks is him finding an imposter who stumbled across some Sith lore or something and triggers something in the Force. And then you could have a season 2 where where Plagueis reveals himself and says, oh no, you're risking my plan. I'm killing you now. Like, you could easily see that being in a season 2 and would actually work pretty darn well. To your point about Luceno understanding everything, additionally, the angle is the idea that the Sith are not agents of the dark side. The Sith view even creation itself as their tool, and the Force itself is their tool. Through this entire book, Plagueis is sitting there saying, you know, the midichlorians, they're scamps. They got a will of their own, but, you can figure it out. You can bend them to your will too. It's that whole idea. It is the exact antithesis of what Qui-Gon espouses in The Phantom Menace, where you understand that the Jedi understand the midichlorians are communicating the will of the Force. And so they understand that they must listen to what the midichlorians are telling them, whereas the Sith are all about first petitioning the Force through the midichlorians and then using the midichlorians to force the Force. There's a tongue twister. To force the Force to do what they wish. And it's this arrogance. It's a literally demonic arrogance that makes this book actually makes the Sith more fascinating because of the fact that even among the true believers, like Tenebris, there's a blind spot. But you understand that there's a distinction even among evil factions, and that is why the rule of 2 should never be discarded. Because you see immediately with Plagueis' differences from Tenebris that by not adhering to this strict rule of 2, you're immediately setting yourself up for the fall and for disaster from, the point of view of everything. So, I mean, what I want to ask you is when you see Plagueis here in the book and he's espousing his stuff, do you think Plagueis could have been the one to seduce Anakin? Or do you think Plagueis is only able to seduce somebody like Palpatine, who's already something of a bastard by the time he meets him?
I think that Plagueis, pre his injury, could possibly have done so. But I think that by the time he is injured to the point where he has to have the breathing apparatus and everything, he becomes so secluded and kind of lost in his own work with, gerrymandering the midichlorians to bend to his will, that I think he kind of loses the ability to, one, read people the way he used to be able to, because he never senses Sidious's dissent against him and plan against him. And he never even contemplates at that point the fact that he could be betrayed. And I think he also just loses a piece of himself where, I mean, at the beginning of the book, we see him being able to, smooth things over in conversation, to be the silver-tongued person, to be able to talk people into things, and throw his weight around in a way that lets him get what he wants. But then as we introduce Sidious, of course, and we already know he's going to be like this, but to watch his maturation into the character that he becomes and the way in which he is the master manipulator more so than anybody else, and in fact, I think that's one of the beauties that, we see Plagueis realize that Sidious has a knack for politics in a way that even he doesn't. And so I feel like he realizes that, yes, his plan is that they're both going to rule together in the end, but he can't do, and he doesn't have the gifts to do what Sidious is doing. So that's a roundabout way to answer the question is, no, I don't think he could have seduced Anakin the way that Sidious was able to, because I don't think he necessarily just has that innate ability in himself, which is to tell people exactly what they need to hear, the way they need to hear it, to get them on his side. I do think that he's able to tap into that in Sidious because, like you said, Palpatine at that point is already a little turd, so and he is able to just take that and polish it into something, even worse. And so that's a great question though. And it really does show too, it seems like as we look at the history of the Sith, throughout this book too, we kind of see that many masters end up kind of picking a student who ends up maybe intentionally or unintentionally being better than them in the places where they're deficient, which is also really interesting.
Well, there's really what's very neat about this book is at the time I had not read, I think the first two Darth Bane books had come out by this point, but not the third, or maybe all three had. I can't recall because way back when I only read the first two and I walked away, but I recently returned to the Darth Bane series and I read all three and I enjoyed them much more this time than I did way back when. I was pretty burned out on expanded universe stuff. Everybody knows this story by this point, but what's fascinating about this book is seeing the effort and the research and the collaboration among the authors that played in this universe is really fascinating, because at the time I was able to read this book and enjoy references and say, okay, all right, I know who they're talking about there. Oh, I know that story. You can sort of like dip in and out in terms of the references and everything. But having read all three Darth Bane books by this point, and then reading this book hard on its heels, it's pretty interesting because you read through it and you say, wow, Luceno was in no way obligated to make the sly references that he does, but the ones that he does that tie into Bane and Rusan and all of the stuff that happened then is legitimately interesting and does enrich the work, because if you know the other works and you come into it, you do get a little bit of a thrill about it. But I can attest that back when I read this, not knowing all the stuff he was referring to, it still worked. So I think it's even another lesson in when you have a really strong author working in the intellectual property, they know how to weave this stuff in the way you should weave in references so that they don't bonk you over the head. I could go to different works that have come out in Star Wars in the Disney era that their references hit you over the head. Whereas these don't hit you over the head. The story works regardless. And the references actually enrich. I won't get specific because I don't want to kick that hornet's nest, overall. But I know you have not read the Darth Bane books, but I'm presuming you didn't feel that you were missing anything with the references that he made.
No, I mean, I picked up that he was utilizing references from those books, and I mean, in all honesty, he's pulling references to many of the other, works that have happened throughout the history of the EU at that point. And so, I mean, it's pretty astounding. The work that he puts in. In fact, the only author that I can think of that really pulls together this type of material like this, I think. John Jackson Miller is actually really good at this type of thing. He does it in his Star Trek books and his Star Wars books. And so there's another author who's a Star Trek author, Christopher L. Bennett, who's also very good at pulling in the tiny bits of minutia from just about every form of Star Trek that that fits. So. Yeah, I mean, Luceno, though, is a master here at this and really knows his stuff. And so, but, one of the things I actually thought was one of the smartest parts of this story is the way in which, this is clearly the fall of the Republic is the fall of Rome being retold. And the way in which we see, Palpatine and Plagueis working towards the downfall of the Republic with the seduction of those in power, slowly integrating, Sith rituals into these clandestine parties, the decadence and the utter debauchery that they are also encouraging in these type of places, the selfishness that they are subtly and manipulatively working into every single facet of the Republic, from the creation and the bolstering of the Trade Federation, to all of these other different factions, to which lead to all of the problems we see in the Phantom Menace. I mean, this is an absolute masterclass in the way in which, when we think about the prequel era and, what George is doing in the story that he's telling, right? We all know it's about the fall of the Republic. Well, to lay out the plan here that Luceno does through these two characters of this grand plan of destroying the Jedi, destroying the Republic, and utilizing not just the Star Wars universe, but the actual historical reference that is being used. I think all of that is pretty astounding work. And, sadly, the book feels very timely.
Well, okay. This is very third rail type of stuff, because there is it's dangerous to talk about the different conspiracy theories that people have. And because even talking about them very much can make you sound like you either believe them or you're poo-pooing them or anything like that. So just everybody take everything what I'm saying just at face value. I'm not coming down on any side of anything. But a lot of the stuff that he's describing feels a lot like what people say about the World Economic Forum, which has its annual meetings in Davos. Or it feels a lot, honestly, and I mean this as a compliment, especially because the recut version of the film, The Godfather Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, the whole thing about international immobiliare, back in 1990, we were like, oh, that's crazy. Ha, 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 ha. I watched The Godfather Coda now, and I'm like, oh yeah, cabal of evil businessmen, and Michael Corleone realizes that they're no different than the mob. They just have the law on their side this time. Yep. Checks out. Like, it literally is one of those things where what he's describing, to your point about being timely, there's a secret cadre of ultra wealthy people who believe that they have the right to rule over everyone and they're going to decide blah, 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 and all of those sorts of things. I think regardless of side on the political aisle, you will find a whole lot of people on both sides saying, well, yeah, of course. They just disagree about who's in the club. Whereas what I think is brilliant about Luceno and some of the other things that he has in there is what is basically put forward is, oh no, you know what, to borrow a line from George Carlin, it's a big club and you ain't in it. You basically learn that Darth Plagueis and the Sith over time have been cultivating this elite club and everybody's in it, including the people you think are the good guys are in it.
Yep.
And it's
yeah.
You know,
well,
it's crazy.
And the only people who aren't in it are the Jedi. And the problem with them is that they are so beholden to holding up the Republic and doing the Republic's bidding instead of the bidding of the Force. They've lost sight. You know, in fact, there's even a contemplation in there about if, you know, the Jedi had chosen not to be on a world so busy and so full of teeming ideologies banding back and forth, if they would have done better to have, you know, the Jedi Temple somewhere else, which we've talked about many times, you know, here on the show.
Yes.
And of course, is really brought to light here because, yes, they are just caught in the middle. And it's a terrible place to be for them because they are losing. And what's happening is that there are people that are seeing it, and this is a brilliant storyline, is the seduction of Dooku, because Dooku clearly sees the Jedi being in the wrong here, as did Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon, though, looks towards a savior, and Dooku looks towards pessimism and falls into that trap of then the dark side because of it. And oh my gosh, just brilliant writing in that story to finally give us how Dooku fits into this master plan.
Even finding out, because, you know, we were talking about, could Plagueis have seduced Anakin? No, but he can seduce Dooku. Dooku's got the years on him and the cynicism on him. And even seeing, like, I look at this and I would give this work at this point to the animation division that gave us Tales of the Jedi and Tales of the Empire. I could see this series. I saw that scene where Plagueis, in his role as Higo Damask, is talking to Dooku and Sifo Dyas and Qui-Gon. I saw it in my head as an animated scene.
Yeah.
I didn't see live actors. I saw it, and I think even the way he described the scene and even Dooku's beard coming to a point, I was like, oh, I see Dooku in the Clone Wars here. I see that version of these characters there. And I know I'm sort of like going off the rails here, but what is great about Luceno, and we have heaped praise on the Jedi Apprentice series for this, but I treasure Qui-Gon as a character. And he gets Qui-Gon's voice in that scene. I hear Qui-Gon saying those lines. I don't say, oh, that's just lines spoken by Qui-Gon. I hear Liam Neeson saying these things very, very directly, very bluntly. And I think this even contributes to it. I don't hear Christopher Lee necessarily. I hear Clone Wars Dooku voice talking to Plagueis in that moment. And it is, obviously, it's a very key moment for me because you can see everything come together. And what I love about it is that you see Sidious as being brilliant, because when he takes his chance to ascend, he doesn't throw everything away. He says, okay, like all of the Sith before Plagueis or Tenebris or anybody else, you teed me up. Now I'm going to take it forward, and I'm going to be the great one, and I'm going to be the winner, and I'm going to get everything done. That core selfishness of evil that is, no matter how much you say it's about the grand plan, it's about you. It's about you wanting to win. And everything that came beforehand is about you, which again speaks perfectly to why a Sith would be wonderful in politics, because it's not really about the grand plan or the greater good or the accomplishment of anything. It's about how all of those things benefit you specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one of the parts of this story is the way in which you have this seduction of Dooku. You have the whole part about the seduction of Sifo Dyas to create the clone army, and like you said, there's really this beautiful thing in that Palpatine doesn't just throw everything away. What he does is he takes all of the pieces that are beneficial to him and continues to use them, specifically in, Dooku, realizing that Dooku, won't be the long-term answer, but he's going to be the right answer at this moment, especially since, he's lost Darth Maul. And so I love this idea. And I think it's just so smart. It's so well done. They've done such a great job in the book of bringing this all together. And, I think that's the thing too. I remember, I got to ask you this. So I remember the first time reading this and being astounded that the book goes through after The Phantom Menace, because I did not expect that. And I was completely shocked. And yet what I loved is the way in which this is what good, tie-in fiction does. It makes you watch something in a completely different way. And I could never watch The Phantom Menace again, or even the Clone Wars or the Attack of the Clones the same way, because this book had added so much to my knowledge of everything that's going on behind the scenes that we aren't actually seeing. It's just astounding.
I still fixate on the fact that at the time that I read it, I tried to convey it to my friend Joey, and he was dismissive and laughed at it and called it stupid, because he thought it was, even though he hates the prequels, and I don't use the word hate lightly here, folks. He literally hated the prequels. And then he hated what I told him about this because of what you're talking about right here, where I said, oh, no. You basically find out this is what was going on behind the scenes, and this is what was going on off screen while I was looking over here at what was going on in the movie. What would you say to somebody where they read this book, or you tell them about this book, and they said, oh, that's dumb. That's not what was on screen. That's not how I saw it. Well, like, how would you compel somebody who hears you tell about the book? How would you compel them to read it? Right? How would you sell reading this book to somebody? Let's say you're sitting with Bob Iger or somebody, and you're trying to convince them to turn this into a series. How do you sell this book to them? How do you say, look at this as source material?
I would say that this book helps bring to life everything that was on screen and make it really pop. That's what it does. It doesn't change anything in the sense that, like, you're with your friend Joey. It's not changing the story. It's not making it different. It's accentuating it. It's almost as if you just turned up the saturation. The colors just get brighter. Every story point gets more pronounced, right? Because what it is doing, it is truly lifting the material up even higher. As like, you know, I think both of us really love the prequel series. We think it's great. And I think everything you need is on screen. There's not anything that's missing. And yet, what we saw with like the Clone Wars series, right? It took everything that we thought we knew and made it even better. So that by the time you get to the end of, you know, Revenge of the Sith, when all of those Jedi are dying, well, now you know all of those Jedi that are dying because you've spent time with them. It means more. The fall of Anakin Skywalker feels worse now because he was a hero. We saw it. He was a hero so many times, right? And so, but this, I think, this is the type of thing where, you know, and two, the way the Clone Wars enhanced the political ramifications of the story, right? This just brings to light the absolute corruption of the Republic at this point to make it make even more sense. It's not as though it didn't make sense before, but it's like now I've got the full on thing. It's like we had the redacted version of the CIA file before of the story. Now we've got the unredacted version and it just blows your mind. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I know exactly what you're saying because I would take everything you said and then I would say if I were pitching this, I would say, and then the ending of this is exactly like what they pulled off with the Clone Wars with the Phantom Apprentice.
Yes. Thank you.
That is exactly the way I see this playing. And I would give... if only I could win the Powerball and I could waltz in and be like, listen, I'll put up my own money here. Let me just hire some people. Let me just make this. Trust me, the kids are going to love it. The kids are going to go crazy for this. Trust me, this is good. This is going to be wonderful. I think that what is a shame, what is a real shame, is that first and foremost, we all know my love-hate relationship with the EU, but there have been some tremendous writers that have worked in the service of the Star Wars license. You know, Luceno is one of them. You mentioned John Jackson Miller, Michael Stackpole with his Rogue Squadron series.
Timothy
Obviously,
Zahn.
Everybody loves Timothy Zahn. Who I was about to say. I was like, we loved him so much we brought Thrawn back, right?
Yeah.
And made him a major player. And it is one of those things where I really wish there was something that did a better job of acknowledging all of these authors and saying that a lot of the ideas, even the ideas in The Rise of Skywalker, regardless of how you felt about the film, when you started to pick away at some of those ideas that they lifted from the EU, it always bothers me in the same way that it bothers me when I watch Marvel movies, the good ones up to Endgame, where if you knew comics, you knew where they were getting these stories from. And I wish that there was a way for Disney to acknowledge these authors. Like when good ideas are brought forward from somebody, I wish there was a way for them to get more acknowledgement.
Right. Yeah.
For things.
But I think, you asked the question, like, how would you sell this, right? And I think one of the ways you sell this, especially now, is like, look at what Filoni and Favreau are doing with The Mandalorian and basically pulling ideas from the Thrawn trilogy, but making it their own. Do the same thing with this. We're not saying you have to do everything in this story. We're not saying you have to do a page-for-page adaptation. Take the ideas here, which are excellent and allows somebody like Dave Filoni to help somebody turn this into a masterpiece, because that's where this stuff is working. And like we've mentioned, you do this story and it does the very thing that Dave Filoni has spent a lifetime of doing in Star Wars these days, which is tying everything together, making it feel more cohesive. This makes the mess of the sequel trilogy make more sense.
Yep.
Regardless,
and it's all sitting right there. It's all
Yes.
sitting right there for
Exactly.
Disney to take, and they refuse to do it. There's you know what? I'm not going to go down that whole road again. What I'm going to say is what I want to ask you is, what is your favorite part of this book? What is the one part where you read it and you said, accepting the end of it where it surprised you how it kept going? Like, what is the one part where you just, everything clicked for you and you would pull it out and you were trying to convince somebody to read it, and you would say, just read this 10 pages, read this chapter. What's the part you're going to pull out and give to them and say, this is what you need to read?
Yeah, I have so many. I was reading this digitally because I wasn't going to spend $100 on a hardcover copy, even though I'll be continuing to look for one and see if I can find one at a decent price, because I want this on my bookshelf, and I'm really mad at myself that I don't have it on my bookshelf. So if any listeners out there have had an extra copy, please feel free to send me one. Just hit me up at MattRushing02 on Twitter, or X Twitter, that is. But gosh, I kept highlighting the sections on Plagueis talking about the midichlorians, talking about the Force at this level, talking about all of that stuff, which made it so fascinating to me. Like, that's the stuff that I was just loving, because I think, what that does is it takes people's, I think, frustration of feeling like, oh, this is just some scientific explanation, and it's creating this incredibly interesting mystery that's still very hard to unravel and still mysterious, right? Like, I loved it. And that's the stuff for me that it's like, I want people to be able to read that and realize what you can do with this depth of storytelling with a great storyteller behind it. To me, that's the stuff that just kind of like, I love watching. I love reading.
For me, being the lifelong Doors fan, I felt like Luceno gave me a little wink, because chapter 13 is titled Riders on the Storm. And I was like, there is no way that James Luceno didn't title that as a wink at Doors fans. But there is, he goes very in-depth in that chapter. And I love how in depth he goes. It opens up with them chasing a herd of beasts, and they're killing the beasts, and it's about getting inside their minds and everything. I'm going to read it. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to read a small passage from it here, because he makes actual references to Ashla and Bogan, which are all the way from the earliest drafts of Star Wars. And in one section, he paused to glance at Sidious. No doubt the texts I've provided contain references to the so-called potentium theory, that light and dark depend on the intention of the user. This is yet another perversion of the truth, perpetrated by those who would keep us shackled to the Force. The power of water and the power of fire are entirely different. Glaciers and volcanoes both have the potential to transform landscapes, but one does so by burying what lies beneath, where the other spews forth new terrain. The Sith are not placid stars, but singularities. Rather than burn with muted purpose, we warp space and time to twist the galaxy to our own design. That is one of the most damn poetic things I have ever read in what could be easily qualified as just a toss-off money-making novel. Yeah, we're gonna write a book called Darth Plagueis. The kids are going to love it. They're going to buy dozens of copies and we're going to be fine. They were going to sell millions of copies no matter what. But I get something like that from the main character of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Holy, that feels like I underpaid for the edition that I bought.
Yeah.
That's literature right there. That is moving. That's amazing. And I don't, sorry to go on and on. Obviously I loved the book.
I think it's great that you said that. It's interesting because that whole theory too is something that was at the end of the Yuuzhan Vong series, New Jedi Order, and kind of lasted for a little bit until the Jedi, Luke's Jedi, go back to a light and dark side. So I think that's fascinating that this is put in this series, that's put in this book. Again, that just kind of shows the depth that we're dealing with, and the breadth of utilizing all parts of the EU to inform this story, and in all parts of Star Wars as we had seen it to that point. And so, I think, it's one of those things, John, like we could probably spend hours just talking about all the different facets of this book that we love and everything that go into it. But we don't really do this much, but I'm wondering if, you had to give this a rating out of 5, what would you give Darth Plagueis?
As a fan, this is a 5, and that's what I'll rate it. As a person who just reads books, this would be completely inscrutable to my wife. She wouldn't know what to make heads or tails of it. So it's not like I'm just going to go to somebody and be like, do you like Star Wars? I don't know. I've never really seen the movie. Read Darth Plagueis. They're not going to know what to do with this. But I'm going to go ahead and rate it as a fan. This is a 5. This is the reason. This is the type of book where this is what kept me involved in the EU, even during the times where I didn't like what the EU was doing. This is the type of book where I would read it and say, oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll buy the next one too, just in hope, it's that shot that you need to keep you going. Where do you land with it?
I mean, this is an absolute 5. I mean, it's, I would say that this book is, it's utterly astounding in its breadth and its depth. Everything that it's doing here is phenomenal. And like you said, yes, it is definitely a story that is for fans. But it's the type of thing where, yes, of course it's for fans. And it's the type of thing that makes this matter, it makes everything that you've watched matter, and then it makes it even better. And so, I mean, just incredible, man. It's one of those, rereading this, it was one of those things where I'm like, I can't believe I'm reading this. This is so good, and it's I think the last time that I read a Star Wars book like this, we were reading the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, and just especially that final book in that series where it's just like, it's that stupid emoji with the blowing brain. That's what this book is like. And if Disney is smart, what it does is it takes this story and it makes it into some kind of series. I think, you could absolutely do it as an animated series if you wanted. But this is the type of story too. I think, the beauty of this is that it because all of the characters are so young in it, you don't even have to worry about the cast in the sense of bringing back old cast members, right? Because it doesn't matter. And that's the beauty of this. So you just do it in any way, shape, or form. If you want to spend $350 million on a series, this should have been the series that you were spending $350 million on. And because it would be a absolute fan favorite. So yeah, this is phenomenal. Everybody, as a Star Wars fan, should read this, because I also think it's still pretty much a series that holds up even in the new canon. There's not a lot in here that doesn't work. And the beauty of this too is, like, again, you could pretty much just do this straight up as an adaptation, and then you just tweak here and there, because that's how minor the things are.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. How delightful it is for us to both love something so completely, so utterly. This enters into a unique realm where I don't know that we've been so aligned on something since we last talked about the animated properties, honestly. So with that, where, if anybody wants to ask you about the mysteries of Darth Plagueis the Wise, where can they find you online?
Yeah, all over the place under the name Matt Rushing 02. You can also find me, of course, here on the network with a completed show called Owl Post, all about the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And over at the TFM network, you can find me doing a bunch of shows. One is the 602 Club, talking about all of the fandoms we love, and then a bunch of Star Trek shows over there that I'm doing. So check all of those out. But, John, if people want to see what secret Sith ceremonies you are performing here this Halloween, where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me out there as Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice, or here on the network, co-hosting a show with Darren Moser and Tristan Riddell called House Lights, where we look at movies. I know, revolutionary concept for a podcast, but honestly, I want to get back to underlining some of the passages in Darth Plagueis. So happy Halloween, and Master Rushing, I think it's time to close these negotiations.
Negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.